Well, hello. Good evening. Um, It's Conspiracy Brother here. With we're doing something different this year. We're trying something different with the channel. So, as you saw yesterday, Brother Darville had a show um, where he broke down a podcast on NPR discussing South Carolina primary for Democrats, as well as its impact and um, what it really all means for this upcoming election, and especially for Joe Biden. Um, and so today I'm doing a show, which I'm streaming on my own channel as well. My channel is called A Look Underneath with Conspiracy Brother. So you can look for it's a new channel, but you can look for that as well if you want to follow me there. We're going to try to do like a simulcast thing with our own channels and this channel so that we can try to improve our content posting. It gives us the flexibility to make content as we can. So when we're not in the group, and we can talk about topics that might be of particular interest to us, but we might not have the full load of guys to deal with each individual topic. Maybe somebody's busy or something like that. So it gives us the flexibility to do what we want to do and still keep in line with the channel. So as you can see from the thumbnail, this episode is called, I kind of didn't know if I wanted to do an episode title and a name or a number. So I titled this episode 1. And I think I called it Old Habits Die Hard, Free Labor and the Capitalist Dream. And you can see from the thumbnail various black men or descendants of freedmen, or might even be some in the more recent pictures. There are some, I think, white men or groups of male prisoners in general who are working. And you see some logos of various food companies, grocery stores. You see the Dairy Farmers of America. You see Cargill, which is I believe the largest corporation in America. They are a meat packing company. Tyson Foods, McDonald's, Burger King, Aldi, just to name a few of the corporations that we'll be dealing with in the article that showed up briefly to start the stream. But and also you'll see in the stream the phrase there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. So we'll kind of dive into that, and let me get the article up and we can just try to dig into it. So let's see. I want to have it this way. All right. So this is from the AP. Let me mute that. This is from the AP, and it's a expose, a study, investigation. It's let's see. Prisoners in the U.S. are part. Let's get this pop-up out of here. Prisoners in the U.S. are part of a hidden workforce linked to hundreds of popular food brands. So I was made aware of this expose from Russell Dobler with Due Dissidence. Russell Dobler and Keaton Weiss, they do a show, I want to say 4 days a week. And Russell has been guest hosting the Jimmy Dore Show. But he mentioned this article. He mentioned specifically the author. So let's take a look at this slideshow, just so we can get an idea of what we're looking at and what we're getting into. So they make some of the same parallels that I have. And you can see there are some, it's apparently Hispanic, some white prisoner workers as well. And, this looks like a scene out of 12 years a slave, right? So, um, from Library of Congress. So, this is from Robin McDowell and Margie Mason. So, he was speaking about Robin McDowell. They interviewed her. Either he interviewed her for his Substack, or they interviewed her for their show podcast. Okay, so it says it was updated 8:03 a.m. January 29th, 2024, and I'll leave links for the articles that I read. So this is a fairly long article, but it's just me, so I'm just going to be talking about this one topic, and I'll try to get some cross references around, just as I do, to try to make my point a little more clearly. But we'll get into it. So here we go. Angola, Louisiana, AP. A hidden path to America's dinner tables begins here, at an unlikely source, a former Southern slave plantation that is now the country's largest maximum security prison. Unmarked trucks packed with prison-raised cattle roll out of the Louisiana State Penitentiary, where men are sentenced to hard labor and forced to work for pennies an hour or sometimes nothing at all. After rumbling down a country road to an auction house, the cows are bought by a local rancher and then followed by the Associated Press another 600 miles to a Texas slaughterhouse that feeds into the supply chains of giants like McDonald's, Walmart, and Cargill. Intricate, invisible webs, just like this one, link some of the world's largest food companies and most popular brands to jobs performed by U.S. prisoners nationwide. According to a sweeping 2-year AP investigation into prison labor that tied hundreds of millions of dollars worth of agricultural products to goods sold on the open market. They are among America's most vulnerable laborers. If they refuse to work, some can jeopardize their chances of parole or face punishment, like being sent to solitary confinement, which has been recognized as a form of torture. At least I think at the international court level, it's been recognized as a form of torture. They are also often excluded from protections guaranteed to almost all other full-time workers, even when they are seriously injured or killed on the job. So here's a group of prisoner laborers, right? It says prisoners harvest turnips at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, April 15th, 2014, in Angola, Louisiana. The goods these prisoners produce wind up in the supply chains of a dizzying array of products found in most American kitchens, from Frosted Flakes, cereal, and ballpark hot dogs to Gold Medal flour, Coca-Cola, and Riceland rice. They are on the shelves of virtually every supermarket in the country, including Kroger, Target, Aldi, and Whole Foods. And some goods are exported, including to countries that have had products blocked from entering the U.S. for using forced or prison labor. And so we talked about this, me and Darvell talked about this with the show we did Tuesday, when we were looking into how there were so many underage employees in slaughterhouses. And the lawyer for the slaughterhouse company said that it was hard to find people to work. And one of the arguments I made was that if you paid a decent wage, you could find people who would be willing to work there. When we looked at that concept of there is no, because I mentioned it then, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, we talked a bit about how the phrase has, at least as far as I could see, primarily been used to rebuff people who had been criticized for being capitalist and also being consumers of mainstream products. I mean, not being capitalist, but being socialist or communist and being consumers of mainstream products, luxury goods, major retail products and retail items. And as I said at the time, and I'll say it now, as a person who attempts to make conscientious decisions about where I spend my money and how, you find that you are still in this situation contributing to the problem, right? Um, because it's virtually every supermarket. So, I mean, they name the large national chains like Kroger and Target and Aldi and Whole Foods. And you think, Whole Foods sells itself on being an organic, they want to be a cruelty free, we don't test on animals store, vegan, vegetarian. Uh, Yet you stock your shelves with items that are essentially produced via slave labor, right? Um, and it's not hyperbolic to say that. I don't think, you know, hope that after we finish our interaction today, um, that we can have a more full understanding about the reality of the situation, that it is in fact slave labor, that that it is not hyperbole, or that it is not um, strange in any way to speak about it in those terms, right? We have to understand that um, slavery was an economic decision, right? It may have served the dual purpose of allowing those people who had sadistic, psychopathic tendencies to act out those tendencies on other living human beings. But the primary reason for slavery was for economic gain, economic benefit. And so here, this is where we are today. So so I'll continue reading. I'll bring that back up. Let's see. Okay. So and just to add to that again, look at Target, right? Commercial that I want to share from Target. I won't share it now, but it's a commercial, and I need to send it. But it's a commercial I want to share from Target for Black History Month, and also some information about Target's DEI program. Also relevant quotes from Malcolm X and Martin Luther King um, about um, about capitalism, because I think fundamentally what we need to understand is uh, the catalyst for this, the catalyst for these types of actions taken by governments and corporations is profit motive. It's profit, right? And so no matter what you may think about how a capitalist system is supposed to operate, in theory, in practice, we see that um, in practice we see that it seems to always trend toward um, this type of exploitation. That seems to be the inevitability of capitalism. Uh, that it always trends toward this level of exploitation. So many of the companies buying directly from prisons are violating their own policies against the use of such labor. I want to just come back up once to say something else that I didn't really hit on. But um, we are exporting products to countries that are not allowed to export products to us because they use forced or prison labor. So again, when we talk about the rules based global order, and we talk about America as a moral compass for the world and a beacon of democracy. What we need to understand is that America is a hypocrite. When you look at the global situation, and you can pick any country in the world that is having some type of strife or turmoil, right? There are protests going on in Haiti right now. We talked extensively, as far as we have had recent shows about war in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. And we have talked a bit about last episode about the unrest and destabilization caused by the U.S. government in South and Central America. So we need to keep that in mind, that America disallows these countries from exporting goods to us, but we export goods to them made under provably prison labor or forced labor situations. So I'll start over. Many of the companies buying directly from prisons are violating their own policies against the use of such labor, but it's completely legal, dating back largely to the need for labor to help rebuild the South's shattered economy after the Civil War. Enshrined in the Constitution by the 13th Amendment, slavery and involuntary servitude are banned except as punishment for a crime. And there was the documentary, the 13th, that really went into detail about this. I hadn't seen it. I still haven't seen it. I'm not a big movie person, so you have to forgive me for that. But we have talked about that on this show, understanding, 13th, 14th, the Reconstruction amendments. And you cannot, we've talked about convict leasing and things like that, but you cannot, there are no coincidences, right? Let's just, Conspiracy Brother says there are no coincidences. But let's just understand that it is not coincidental that the very people that you brought to this country to be slaves are the same people who you have created laws to unjustly target and send to prison, and that by going to prison, you can continue to be a slave in this country again. Right? It is not a coincidence. There are no coincidences. Okay. That clause is currently being challenged on the federal level, and efforts to remove similar language from state constitutions are expected to reach the ballot in about a dozen states this year. So let's just, it's a hyperlink. Let's check that hyperlink out for the sake of, because you have to wonder, if you abolish slavery, why do you allow it to exist under any circumstances? Why? And I mean, I feel like the answer is because we understand that in a system such as ours, you must have exploitation in order to prosper. Like I've made the joke that America is a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme, and when you understand the way that the exploitation occurs, you can't see it any other way. The people on the bottom do all the work, and they send the money up, and the money continues to go up until it rests at the people on the top of the pyramid. So just to read this, lawmakers mark Juneteenth by reviving Abolition Amendment by Terry Tang. So this is from 21. As a nation, this week made Juneteenth a federal holiday, honoring the end of the enslavement of Black people. Lawmakers are reviving calls to end a loophole in the Constitution that allowed another form of slavery, forced labor for those convicted of some crimes, to thrive. So you can't see it. I didn't share the screen, but that was and I can post a link to that, but it's hyperlinked in the article that I'll post. Some prisoners work on the same plantation soil where slaves harvested cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane more than 150 years ago, with some present-day images looking eerily similar to the past. In Louisiana, which has one of the country's highest incarceration rates, men working on the quote farm line end quote still stoop over crops stretching far into the distance. Um, and some of this is just going to be heartbreaking to hear, right? Because what you see, and this is the as much as this channel is dedicated to the Freedman Collective and a look underneath, right? And I have to keep remembering that because I toyed between a deep dive and a look underneath or a look below. But a look underneath is dedicated to the uplifting of descendants of freedmen. I still understand that exploitation that capitalism caused, or that the exploitation that capitalism thrives under, is a product of convenience. And so it was black people because we were the most vulnerable, right? They tried with Native Americans and it just didn't work. So they tried it with poor Europeans and it also didn't work, right? Because they still had knowledge of the laws and of the rules and like I talked about with allowing foreign illegal immigrants to be police officers and soldiers, you're not going to have a connection to the country or to the people who live here the same as you would if you, and irrespective of your ethnic background, right? When you are from America, you grow up here, you live here, you like football, you like baseball or basketball or hockey. You learn the cultural traditions that we share as a nation, whether or not they are ethnically specific to you from your home country. You learn to absorb that when you come here. And for somebody who is newly here and who is here with the promise of citizenship for good behavior, what will a person be willing to do to ensure that they have, citizenship and their family taken care of? But yes, so that exploitation is necessary, and it was a matter of convenience. You use racism to justify the treatment, the brutality. You had to make animals out of people because otherwise people would not be able to, in good conscience, do these types of things, right? So there's a long, I talked about it a bit, a history of scientific racism where you try to justify, and some people still believe it to this day, you try to justify the treatment of certain quote unquote races of people, um, because of a diminished IQ or the projection that they have some kind of diminished IQ, which there's no uh, biological scientific justification for, but this is where we are, right? And so here we'll listen to this gentleman's story. Willie Ingram talks about his time spent as a prisoner at Angola during an interview October 1st, 2023. So just last year. Willie Ingram picked everything from cotton to okra during his 51 years in the state penitentiary, better known as Angola. And I mean, it is hatred. But I had a teacher I remember when I was in the 11th grade, and we're talking about George Bush. He was still president, and we were talking to class, and he was a white teacher, and this was like a social studies class, and me and a classmate were saying, "Man, George Bush just hates black people." I think this was after Katrina or around Katrina, and just said, "Man, George Bush just hates black people," and he says he doesn't hate black people, and I'm sitting there like, "What are you talking about?" Like the class is like up in arms, and he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, "You have to care to hate." He doesn't even care about black people. Black people are not even a thought. And that's really the truth. You know, when you think about the stories that we discuss, about the increase of inflation causing people to lose homes, people to have to sleep in cars, um, people going sick, going bankrupt, not being able to afford to eat. When you think about those kinds of things, the people who make money and who control the infrastructure, the people who make the decisions that run the country, they don't even consider us. We are insignificant to them in a way that is hard to conceive. And so it isn't even hatred, but it's just no concern at all, right? That allows a country or a state to have a man picking a man who is a descendant of slaves from this country, from this state, from this area, to be picking the same crops in the same location 150 years later, 160 years, or almost 160 years after it was made illegal. Right? It should be 161 after it was made illegal. Old habits die hard. Old habits die hard. Free labor and the capitalist dream. Willie Ingram picked everything from cotton to okra during his 51 years in the state penitentiary, better known as Angola. What could you have done that demanded 51 years of your time that they let you out for? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you say, oh, he murdered somebody, okay, and you give him 50 years, but then you let him out. If the murder was so bad, and I'm not saying it isn't, I'm not downplaying that. But if it was so bad that he had to go to jail for 50 years behind it, just keep him in there. Why did you let him out? If he was such a danger to society and the community around him, why let him out? During his time in the fields, he was overseen by armed guards on horseback and recalled seeing men working with little or no water, passing out in triple-digit heat. Some days, he said, workers would throw their tools in the air to protest, despite knowing the potential consequences. And I read 12 Years a Slave. So, the imagery that this brings to my mind is that automatically. That's what I think of. Because I can recall listening to the stories that Solomon Northrop talked about, having a ration of food per week, pork fat, or like back bacon, cornmeal, or peas and rice for the week, and then your back fat would get rancid, and so you still had to figure out how you could eat what you could eat, and you could grow a garden on your own time if you were so inclined to make supplementary food. But notoriously, slaves, black people, freedmen and descendants of freedmen, and enslaved, right? Because they weren't freedmen yet, suffered from low protein. So they were undersized. Children would frequently be undersized, right? But imagine the imagery, because you if you go to Louisiana in the summertime, the heat is not, if you're from up north. I live in Michigan. We have humidity. We have a lot of humidity. We have a lot of water, large bodies of water around us. I think the stories were no more than 70 miles from a large body of water. But when you go down south, it's like the heat sits on you. It's oppressive. It feels oppressive. I lived in Atlanta almost 9 years. I lived in Virginia, Washington, D.C., year and a half. And that heat is oppressive. It's the kind of heat that you feel like you can feel yourself moving around in. It don't feel like air. It feels like a sweater or something is on your body. And you just start to sweat. And you're working and you're working and you're working, and you don't have a water break. And as much as they're talking about triple digit heat, what I learned from living in Georgia and working outside is that it's the heat index, which is the humidity times the temperature, that really causes the problems. Because it's that when you have a high heat index, you have high humidity in the air, your sweat is not able to evaporate, which can lead to heat stroke and other heat related illnesses and death. But sometimes the workers, the slaves, the prisoners would throw their tools in the air to protest despite knowing the potential consequences. Quote, they'd come, maybe four in the truck, shields over their face, billy clubs, and they'd beat you right there in the field. They beat you, handcuff you, and beat you again, end quote, said Ingram, who received a life sentence after pleading guilty to a crime he said he didn't commit. He was told he would serve 10 and a half years and avoid a possible death penalty, but it wasn't until 2021 that a sympathetic judge finally released him. He was 73. So he was in jail for 51 years. He got out at 73. So he was 22 when he went in. That's his whole life. Completely his whole life. You have missed 5 decades. And again, we get into issues of the criminal justice system. You pled guilty to a crime you didn't commit, which is a story we've heard over and over and over again, right? We talked about that with the black site in Chicago, where they were keeping prisoners, wouldn't let them, suspects, not even prisoners, suspects, wouldn't let them meet with the judges, with their lawyers, and they weren't guilty of crimes. And eventually, I think his name was Burge. He was like a police captain or something. Um, he died before anything could happen to him behind it. But he was essentially responsible for the process, um, the whole system that allowed this to happen. Okay. So it says the number of people behind bars in the United States started to soar in the 70s, just as Ingram entered the system, disproportionately hitting people of color, which is to say black people, which is to say descendants of freedmen. Now, with about 2 million people locked up, U.S. prison labor from all sectors has morphed into a multi-billion-dollar empire, extending far beyond the classic images of prisoners stamping license plates, working on road crews, and battling wildfires. Okay. Just wanted to check and make sure that my scoot up some. Wanted to check and make sure that my camera is doing okay. So some prisoners earn pennies or nothing at all. So here's your photo gallery. One of 8 prisoners line up to work inside a vegetable processing plant at Angola. Prisoners harvest turnips. And look at those hands. Look how rough they are from the work they're doing. Uh, Prisoner loads harvested turnips onto a cart at Angola. Prisoner unloads a truck of harvested corn at the Cummins unit of Arkansas Department of Corrections. Prisoner Dean Kreider uses a device to give a cow pills in the dairy at the Montana State Prison. Prisoner Jason Garcia unloads hay at the dairy in the Montana State Prison. Prisoner Brett Lockhart left and Mark McGuire move a newly born calf at the dairy at the Montana State Prison. Prisoner Michael Jefferson wipes away sweat while herding cattle at the Cummins unit of Arkansas Department of Corrections. Though almost every state has some kind of farming program, agriculture represents only a small fraction of the overall prison workforce. Still, an analysis of data amassed by the AP from correctional facilities nationwide traced nearly $200 million worth of sales of farmed goods and livestock to businesses over the past 6 years. A conservative figure that does not include tens of millions more in sales to state and government entities. Much of the data provided was incomplete, though it was clear that the biggest revenue came from sprawling operations in the South and leasing out prisoners to companies. So the South is still doing convict leasing. This is why I left the South. I've said this before, I've talked to people about it, and they've asked me about it. My grandfather was born in Tennessee and he grew up in Georgia. And when he was 14 years old, he moved to Michigan to work at the plant. And never in my life did I ever hear him say, I'm moving back down south. Now, all his family, or the majority of his family, had moved up. Aunts and uncles, his grandmother, his mother. So, it was a substantial amount of his family had, uh, laid down roots in the North. But I'd never heard any of them say, when I get done working, or when whatever the case, I'm going back down south. I never heard him say it. And so it was just like, I'm down there working. And I said, man, and I was, married and I was getting ready to have kids. I said, I can't stay down here. I can't. What am I doing down here? What am I doing down here? You know, what is wrong with me? And I left. But if you go to College Park, Georgia, in the post office, they have a mural set up that shows, because there's like a train track that runs through the middle of the town. And there's a mural set up with like a black man hammering a spike into the train track. And that was really the first time I had ever even thought about it, because you always hear about, oh, the Chinese built the railroads and stuff. But the whole thing about John Henry was that he was a rail worker. That was what he was doing. He was building the railroad, steel driving man. He was driving steel spikes into the ground for the railroad. And at that moment, and this was probably, I was 22, 21 or something like that. And I said, wow, black people built the railroad too, huh? And it was one of those things like I said, you don't really think about it because the propaganda that you are exposed to doesn't talk about it. But of course, we built the railroads. We did everything in this country that you didn't want to pay somebody to do. Because even if the Chinese were doing it, you still had to pay them some money. You didn't have to pay us, because the majority of us you could just do through convict leasing. Old habits. Old habits die hard. Free labor and the capitalist dream. Old habits die hard. They're still doing convict leasing today. Corrections officials and other proponents note that not all work is forced and that prison jobs save taxpayers money. For example, in some cases, the food produced is served in prison kitchens or donated to those in need outside. They also say workers are learning skills that can be used when they're released and given a sense of purpose, which could help ward off repeat offenses. In some places, it allows prisoners to also shave time off their sentences, and the jobs provide a way to repay a debt to society, they say. While most critics don't believe all jobs should be eliminated, they say incarcerated people should be paid fairly, treated humanely, and that all work should be voluntary. Some note that even when people get specialized training like firefighting, which is something that happened in California because they have so many wildfires there, their criminal records can make it impossible, almost impossible, to get hired on the outside. And that was a situation when Kamala Harris was attorney general in California. They would have prisoners serve as firefighters. They would train them to be firefighters and fight the wildfires. But when they got out of prison, because they had records, they weren't even allowed to use the skills that they had gained in prison on the outside. And they were criminally underpaid. I think it was something like, in some cases, $5 a day to fight fires, and some died. And she was trying to justify it, just like here. Oh, it saves taxpayers money. This is the justification that you always find when you're dealing with somebody and you're trying to talk to them about capitalism or the idea of fairness in an economic system that is built off of exploitation. It saves the taxpayers money. There are certain things in life that you can't put a price on, that you ought not put a price on. You should not. We don't have debtor's prison in this country. We don't have slavery. We're not supposed to have slavery, but this is clearly legal because, I mean, like you always hear about people making like prison rape jokes. This is why that kind of thing is legal. As a prisoner, you do not have rights. You're a slave. You don't have rights. It's literally in the Constitution. And then people act surprised that they literally have created laws, whole cloth, like vagrancy and loitering laws, which targeted Black people. And so Black people are disproportionately incarcerated. Quote, they are largely uncompensated. They're being forced to work and it's unsafe. They also aren't learning skills that will help them when they're released, end quote, said law professor Andrea Armstrong, an expert on prison labor at Loyola University, New Orleans. Quote, it raises the question of why we are still forcing people to work in the fields, end quote. This concept of, well, you should have to pay a debt to society doing labor, fine. But if I owe a debt to a creditor, they can't, if I owe student loans to the government, they can't take my whole check. They can't legally take every penny of my check. I still have to live. I still have other financial obligations. Here's women, in case you thought it was only men, right? And so this is why you see an increase in female prisoners as well. Exploitation is irrespective of gender, race, religious belief. All those things are incidental. Who is most vulnerable? Who can we most take advantage of is really the cause. And for a very long time, and even to this day, it has been our community. It has been the descendants of freedmen. It's been our community primarily. But as the need for greater and greater revenue generation has occurred, when you can no longer oppress 15% of the population to offset the desires of the remaining 85%, you have to continue to eat up the rest. So let's take 5% of the women. We'll take 20% of the rest of the males. Well, we need to take more males. We need to take more of the women. And so you have these kinds of statistics. Because if black males make up 60% of the prison population, white males still make up 40%, or if not completely 40. They were making up like 38%. Still, I mean, the skew on that is ridiculous. But what I'm saying is they are doing all they can to make up the difference. Prisoners serving time at Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville, arrive at the gates of a Hickman's Family Farms egg ranch, a shadow workforce with few protections. In addition to tapping a cheap, reliable workforce, like they say, oh, you're a captive audience. You don't get more captive than a prison slave. Companies sometimes get tax credits and other financial incentives. Incarcerated workers also typically aren't covered by the most basic protections, including workers' compensation and federal safety standards. In many cases, they cannot file official complaints about poor working conditions. And this is the same thing you saw with the illegal immigrants. When you have somebody illegal who's working for you, if you're supposed to pay them $10 and you pay them $5, who do they complain to? The police? Hey, yeah, I mean, I'm working here illegally, and they were supposed to give me $10, but they only gave me $5. That ain't how it works. That's not how it works. These prisoners often work in industries with severe labor shortages, doing some of the country's dirtiest and most dangerous jobs. The AP sifted through thousands of pages of documents and spoke to more than 80 current and formerly incarcerated people, including men and women convicted of crimes that ranged from murder to shoplifting, writing bad checks, theft, or other illegal acts linked to drug use. Some were given long sentences for nonviolent offenses because they had previous convictions, while others were released after proving their innocence. Reporters found people who were hurt or maimed on the job and also interviewed women who were sexually harassed or abused, sometimes by their civilian supervisors or the correctional officers overseeing them. While it's often nearly impossible for those involved in workplace accidents to sue, the AP examined dozens of cases that managed to make their way into the court system. Reporters also spoke to family members of prisoners who were killed. One of those was Frank Dwayne Ellington, who was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after stealing a man's wallet at gunpoint. A result of Alabama's Habitual Offenders Act in 2017, Ellington, 33, was cleaning a machine. Now, this is going to sound familiar to the video we talked about with Marjack Foods in Jackson or Hattiesburg, Mississippi. In 2017, Ellington, 33, was cleaning a machine near the chicken, quote, kill line, end quote, in Ashland at Koch Foods. So the Koch brothers, the libertarian, Republican, conservative donors who really want to get rid of all workplace regulations, all types of government regulations on businesses, funded this. One of the country's biggest poultry processing companies, when its whirling teeth caught his arm and sucked him inside, crushing his skull, he died instantly. So, doesn't it sound like that kid Devon who died at the on the chicken machine, getting sucked into it in a similar way? During a years-long legal battle, Koch Foods at first argued Ellington wasn't technically an employee and later said his family should be barred from filing for wrongful death because the company had paid his funeral expenses. If I'm not technically an employee, then why am I working here? But this is the kind of thing we're talking about when it's capitalist exploitation, right? I just want to pull a quote up from Malcolm X. I'll read it because I don't want to get the screen share, but I'll read it. It's on my phone. Here's what Malcolm X says about capitalism. A couple things, but I'll read this one first. Malcolm X says, it is impossible for capitalism to survive. Now, he said this years ago. And I think, I mean, obviously, he said it years ago. He died. He was murdered in 65. But I think some of this still rings true. It is impossible for capitalism to survive primarily because the system of capitalism needs some blood to suck. Capitalism used to be like an eagle, but now it's more like a vulture. It used to be strong enough to go and suck anybody's blood, whether they were strong or not. But now it has become more cowardly, like the vulture, and it can only suck the blood of the helpless. As the nations of the world free themselves, as the nations of the world free themselves, capitalism has less victims, less to suck, and it becomes weaker and weaker. It's only a matter of time, in my opinion, before it will collapse completely. Now, some of that was true, and I think some of that, based on the trajectory the world was going in before he was murdered, assassinated, I agree. Right. And to some degree, you see uh, a crop of revolutionary minded individuals standing up again who are saying, no more. But, you know, it's a process that needs to play itself out. Here's another quote. This one is short. You can't have capitalism without racism. And there's one more. I cannot. Give me 1 second. Yeah, Malcolm said, "You show me a capitalist, and I'll show you a bloodsucker." Okay, so it is necessary for capitalism to achieve its end. Because you look at the whole system, right? Corporations, from year to year, they want to make an increase in profit of 2% minimum. I was in economics class when I heard that, and I'm sitting there saying, like, why? And the 2% doesn't factor in booms and bust cycles. So, for example, my sister was a manager at a store, and after tax time, more people would shop in her store. And so her numbers for that month were great. You know, let's just say she made, 10,000 extra dollars. I don't really know. But let's just say she made 10,000 extra dollars. So the next month, they wanted her to make 2% more than that. So what's that? 10%, 1% of 10,000 should be what? 100. So 2% is 1,200. No, sorry. 2% is 2% more. As Jimmy Dore says, I'm not a math surgeon. But so 2% more should be a 200 extra dollars. So you want to make $10,200. But if the reason everybody was purchasing your products was because they had money from tax returns, and that's a finite amount of money, how can you expect to get back to the 10,000, let alone the 10,200? Right? But they don't see it that way. And so I talked to my teacher, my professor, and I said, why is that the measure of the strength of a company? That you can make money, more money, year over year over year. And he said that had to do with how they looked at growth. I said, wouldn't a measure of stability, or stability, not growth, stability? I said, wouldn't a better measure of stability be that you were able to make this same amount year over year? And I thought to myself, why do businesses think that it is possible to, into perpetuity, make 2% year over year, month over month, cycle over cycle? And it kind of came to me, after thinking about it over a period of time, that they factor in population growth. So they just assume as populations grow and increase, that you'll be able to continue to amass greater numbers of profit. That does not make sense given the factors of outsourcing jobs, of reducing wages or depressing wages, and of trying to find ways to uh, undermine a potential workforce. For example, hiring prisoners who you don't have to pay because they are slaves. Um, so the case eventually was settled under undisclosed terms. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, fined the company $19,500, saying workers had not been given proper training and that its machines had inadequate safety guards. So the Koch brothers, I think one of them just died. Like, I think their names are David and Charles Koch. And one of them just died. But let's see, Koch net worth. So Charles Koch died. No, the other one died. But uh, it says he was ranked as the 22nd richest man in the world as of November 2023, so last year. And it says he was worth $60 billion. So you found the company liable because they were not properly training employees, and you find him. So let's see. 1 million is a thousandth of a billion. So 100,000 is a 10,000th, right? Or is a 100,000 times is a billion. So 100,000 is 100,000th. So 3 zeros. And in a billion, what is there? 9 zeros. So it's like 100 millionth of $1 billion, what they were required to pay as a company for this. And it said up above this that Koch Foods is one of the country's biggest poultry processing companies. So they make money. And this is the thing. like I've said, I said this before, when you look at the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, but I was speaking about the 14th Amendment. Um, how this country operates is that it does whatever it can do to try and solve the problem, although it doesn't solve the problem, but whatever it can do to appear to solve the problem in the least amount of steps, whether it does the job adequately or not. And so you have created this system where the punishment doesn't even deter the crime. It would take, if a person just had $1 single billion and they spent $100 a day, it would take them a little less than 3 years to spend it all. At $1 million a day, if they just had 1 single billion and we didn't collect interest or anything like that, and you spent $1 million a day, it would take you a little under 3 years to do it. And this man is worth by himself $60 billion. And the company that he founded, or CEO or whatever, had to pay a fine for negligence in training an employee, and the employee died, and they didn't even have to pay $20,000. Quote, it's somebody's child, it's somebody's dad, it's somebody's uncle, it's somebody's family, end quote, said Ellington's mother, Alicia Powell Clark. Quote, yes, they did wrong, but they are paying for it, end quote. The AP found that U.S. prison labor is in the supply chains of goods being shipped all over the world via multinational companies, including to countries slapped with import bans by Washington in recent years. For instance, the U.S. has blocked shipments of cotton coming from China, a top manufacturer of popular clothing brands, because it was produced by forced or prison labor. But crops harvested by U.S. prisoners have entered the supply chains of companies that export to China. And I think this is one of the issues why, when you think about the Uyghur genocide and talk about and issues like that, I don't really know. People say, well, if you're concerned with Palestine, if you're concerned with, why aren't you concerned with China and the Uyghurs? And I'll reiterate what I have said on a previous show. I don't know what's happening over there. I literally do not know. But I do know that the people who are telling me that there is a genocide of Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of China are the same people who are not telling me about this, are the same people who are lying and misleading me about everything else. And if the best argument that our country has is to say that China is doing it too, then what kind of example, what kind of moral authority do we have to try to impose anything on anyone ever? But while prison labor seeps into the supply chains of some companies through third-party suppliers without them knowing, let me check my camera again. 1 second. I just want to make sure I am good. Okay. Others buy direct. Mammoth commodity traders that are essential to feeding the globe, like Cargill, Bunge, Louis Dreyfus. I'm not sure, but I know Julia Louis Dreyfus. Her family are billionaires. The actress, her family are billionaires. I can't remember where their money comes from. Let me check. But her family are billionaires. Julia Louis Dreyfus. But her family are billionaires. She was born in New York City, the daughter of French billionaire Gerard Louis Dreyfus. So let's see. So uh, Gerard C. Louis Dreyfus was a French American businessman. His net worth was estimated at 3.4 billion by Forbes in 2006. He was the chairman of the Louis Dreyfus Energy Services and the great grandson of Leopold Louis Dreyfus, founder of Louis Dreyfus Group. So Louis Dreyfus Company is a French merchant firm that is involved in agriculture, food processing, international shipping, and finance. So yes, that's it. That's it. That's her. It's attached to everybody. Obviously she doesn't have a personal hand in it, I'm sure, but she makes her money from this too. The acting thing is like a pet project, but yeah, she's a billionaire. So Archer Daniels Midland and Consolidated Grain and Barge, which together post annual revenues of more than $400 billion, have in recent years scooped up millions of dollars worth of soy, corn, and wheat straight from prisons which compete with local farmers. The AP reached out for comment to the companies it identified as having connections to prison labor, but most did not respond. Cargill acknowledged buying goods from prison farms in Tennessee, Arkansas, and Ohio, saying they constituted only a small fraction of the company's overall volume. It added that, quote, we are now in the process of determining the appropriate remedial action, end quote. So basically, you found us out. So we'll talk to you until you get away from us. We'll tell you, you know, we're trying to figure out how we handle this situation. The fact that you still have to figure out the best course of action when dealing with illegal, or it's not illegal, but immoral prison slave labor lets you know what you're dealing with. The AP tied prison labor to the supply chains of some of the world's biggest companies: Hillshire Farm, Eggland's Best, Kroger, Sara Lee, Cargill, McDonald's, Plugra, premium European style. I don't know. I'm assuming it must be some kind of baked goods. Gold Medal Flour, Kellogg's Rice Krispies, Walmart, Hickman's Family Farms, Domino's Pizza, Aldi, State Fair Brands, Cheerios, Jimmy Dean, Land O'Lakes. And this is the interesting thing. Land O'Lakes just recently got rid of the used to be an Indian girl in the middle of their logo who was holding a plate of butter. And you got rid of that, right? You got rid of that because it was insensitive, but you use slave labor. So it brings me an interesting topic. I want to pause right quick. I may have to do more than one show, and that seems to be, this is about an hour and 13. And so I I I I didn't want this to be, and I said, I'm like, yeah, I'll try to make this like a half an hour, no more than an hour. I should have that meme up from Minister X. Whatever, then I'm wrong. You got me now. You figured me out. You caught me red-handed. So this book here, let me see if I can get it to come in clearly. It's called Virtue Hoarder. So it doesn't come in clearly. But it's called Virtue Hoarders: The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class by Catherine Liu. So I want to read something in here, if I can find it. Because it talks about that kind of virtue signaling. Um, let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Give me a second. I'm going to mute my mic. So here you go. It says, as a class, the PMC loves to talk about bias rather than inequality, racism rather than capitalism, visibility rather than exploitation. Tolerance for them is the highest secular value, but tolerance has almost no political or economic meaning. So that's just one brief. And then here, although the PMC is profoundly secular in nature, its rhetorical tone is pseudo religious. While the PMC infuriates conservative Christians with its immediate monopoly on liberal righteousness, it finds salvation, like most Protestant sects, in material and earthly success. In liberal circles, talking about class or class consciousness before other forms of difference is not just controversial, it is heretical. They call you a class reductionist if you argue that race, gender, and class are not interchangeable categories. They pile on you with the legalistic and deadly term intersectional to accommodate the materialistic critique of their politics. The PMC simply does not want its class identity or interest unmasked. Young people wanting to enter what the Ehrenreichs call the liberal professions and gain positions in academia and the culture and media industries have to adapt themselves to the Procrustean bed of PMC dominated networks of influence. Anyone who wants to privilege class critique should be prepared to be thoroughly red baited and ask questions like, quote, why do you wear presentable clothes when you're a socialist? Shouldn't you wear burlap sacks, end quote, and quote, why do you enjoy sports? Isn't that part of the military industrial complex, end quote, and quote, why do you encourage conflict? Aren't you irresponsibly fomenting violence, end quote. PMC elites believe that asceticism is the fate of the leftist, that any kind of social conflict arising from corrosive inequality is her fault. So just, to kind of briefly get into that discussion about the ways in which these empty words and rhetoric are used and thrown around, right? Another company you see on that list is Target. Target, I want to say maybe 7 years ago, Target instituted a policy where anyone could go to any bathroom, and they did it before really anybody else. Target got rid of gendered toy aisles, so you could just go to any toy aisle if you wanted to. It wasn't, or like clothing aisle, was something crazy like that. The clothing aisle didn't say boy and girl anymore; it was just clothes, and anybody could go anywhere and whatever. But you have slave labor producing the stuff that you sell in the grocery aisle and most likely in the clothing aisle, right? Because if you're selling cotton, you're buying the finished products. You see what I'm saying? This is the kind of empty words that they give to people in our communities to try to pacify us. And I want to show, let me stop sharing this right quick, because I want to, this reminds me of I did want to show this commercial while I'm thinking about it. It's a Target commercial for Black History Month. So let's see. I do like to talk. Hey, what up, what up, what up? I'm just saying this. I was on that article, so I didn't get to see really a lot of the comments, but I do like to talk. I had 5 people watching. Now it's just 4. So, I mean, now it's just 1. I lost 4. That's what I meant to say. But let's see. I can find that Black History Month commercial. I think you guys will like it, from Target. They employ slave labor, so celebrate that for Black History.
What's up, baby? These are our moments of joy.
And can you hear that? Can you hear that? Could you hear that? Could you hear anybody in the comment section? Could you hear that? Rewind it.
Cheese. What's up, baby? These are our moments of joy. Say cheese. Hey. Our everyday. Love, our traditions. Our stories, our creativity, our get-togethers. Because the joy we create every day is what makes us, us. Shop the Black History Month collection at Target.
So that's the thing. It's empty. It's meaningless, right? You use slave labor to make the products that you sell, whether it's food or, like I said, the shirts and stuff you wear. You use slave labor to produce it. So what are you saying? What are you doing? What's really going on? You want me to sit here and pat you on the back because you guys talk about DEI and bias and all this stuff. And I had a thing about Target's DEI program, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. But they want to talk about all this stuff, centering, empowering. We want to empower people, and I mentioned that in the Virtual Hoarders book too. But I'd have to spend more time looking forward, and I want to not let this drag out. I'll probably try to stop this at the hour 30-minute mark and just do a part 2. But you use slave labor. You use slave labor. So all these slogans and all these things that they have done or are doing to try and appeal to some high, right, to the trans community, the LGBTQ community, or the Black community, or whatever, it's empty. So you see Bel Joyoso, they make cheese, Pizza Hut, Cheerios, which is General Mills, the Dairy Farmers of America, which is I believe that's like an industry association, Burger King, Tyson Foods, Ballpark. I always thought Ballpark and State Fair were owned by the same people. Polly O, which I think is another like Italian cheese. Saputo, I don't know what that is. Costco, which is where I shop. I don't shop at Sam's Club because Walmart mistreats their employees. But I guess Costco does too. They got a union, but you got slaves making your meat, growing your vegetables. Russell Stover, Pepsi. So again, there's no ethical consumption, right? You cannot escape it, because unless you buy your meat from local farms and you get your bulk fabric or spin your own wool, or you know what I mean, and unless you are living completely, because even if you buy a vehicle, if you buy a phone, there's a child somewhere in the Congo who's missing limbs because they're digging out in the mines to build your devices. There is no ethical consumption. But in this country right now, old habits die hard. Free labor and the capitalist dream. McDonald's said it would investigate links to any such labor, while Archer Daniels Midland and General Mills, which produces gold medal flour, pointed to their policies in place restricting suppliers from using forced labor. Whole Foods responded flatly, quote, Whole Foods Market does not allow the use of prison labor in products sold at our stores, end quote. And I guess if you wish it hard enough or say it loudly enough, it must be true, right? That's what the political environment has shown us the last 7 years, that if you say it loudly enough or wish it hard enough, it must be true. Bunge said it sold all facilities that were sourcing from corrections departments in 2021, so they are, quote, no longer part of Bunge's footprint, end quote. Dairy Farmers of America, a cooperative that bills itself as the top supplier of raw milk worldwide, said that while it has been buying from correctional facilities, it now only has one, quote, member dairy, end quote, at a prison, with most of that milk used inside. And this is the other thing. We talked about plausible deniability. But all of these companies now use third party suppliers, or they'll use third party employment agencies to hire, like you saw with the chicken. So when it comes down to, hey, how did you let a 12-year-old work at your factory when you got to be, when the person's social security number said they were 32 years old? Well, we didn't get involved in that. We didn't. It was a third party who hired them. It was a third party staffing agency. You got slaves, and you're using prison slaves, descendants of freedmen. You're using the people who used to have ancestors working these same fields. Because I think it says it later in this article, but Angola prison is 18,000 acres large, the land. They said it's larger than the island of Manhattan, which is, if there's any New Yorkers watching this, Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken, includes Harlem. It includes, lower Manhattan, which is like the downtown area, and maybe includes like the Bronx or something. I could be wrong. But like, it's larger than all of that. Because I know some of the boroughs are on Long Island. I don't know if the Bronx is on Long Island or not. That's what I don't know. Because even though like Brooklyn is technically but it's on Long Island. And Queens is on Long Island too, even though they're considered separate. They're on Long Island. But the facility is larger than the island of Manhattan. To understand the business of prison labor and the complex movement of agricultural goods, the AP collected information from all 50 states through public records requests and inquiries to corrections departments. Reporters also crisscrossed the country following trucks transporting crops and livestock linked to prison work, and tailed transport vans from prison and work release sites heading to places such as poultry plants, egg farms, and fast food restaurants. A lack of transparency and at times baffling losses exposed in audits added to the challenge of fully tracking the money. Big ticket items like row crops and livestock are sold on the open market, with profits fed back into agricultural programs. For instance, about a dozen state prison farms, including operations in Texas, slave state, Virginia, capital of the Confederacy, slave state, Kentucky, slave state, but I believe they were allowed to stay in the Union, and Montana have sold more than $60 million worth of cattle since 2018. As with other sales, the custody of cows can take a serpentine route because they are often sold online at auction houses or to stockyards. It can be almost impossible to determine where the beef eventually ends up. Sometimes there's only one way to know for sure. So here's a little video montage. Let's see if I can. Louisiana State, from prison to auction to you. In Louisiana, an AP reporter watched as 3 long trailers loaded with more than 80 cattle left the state penitentiary. The cows raised by prisoners traveled for about an hour before being unloaded for sale at Dominique's Livestock Market in Baton Rouge. As they were shoved through a gate into a viewing pen, the auctioneer jokingly warned buyers, quote, "Watch out," end quote. The cows, he said, had just broken out of prison. Within minutes, the Angola lot was snapped up by a local livestock dealer, who then sold the cattle to a Texas beef processor that also buys cows directly from prisons in that state. Meat from the slaughterhouse winds up in the supply chains of some of the country's biggest fast food chains, supermarkets, and meat exporters, including Burger King, Sam's Club, and Tyson Foods. Quote, "It's a real slap in the face to hear where all those cattle are going," end quote, said Jermaine Hudson, who served 22 years at Angola on a robbery conviction before he was exonerated. So 22 years at Angola before he was exonerated. He said it's especially galling because the food served in prison tasted like slop. Quote, those were some of the most disrespectful meals, end quote. Hudson said, quote, that I ever in my life had to endure, end quote. And he's from Louisiana. So, not to make light of this situation, but he knows good food. And so this is an aerial view of Angola Complex. This is probably where they're going to tell you the size. In this aerial photo, the Louisiana State Penitentiary lies along the bending Mississippi River. So there's the Mississippi. Here's Angola. The rise of prison labor. So Angola is imposing in its sheer scale. The so-called Alcatraz of the South, end quote, is tucked far away, surrounded by alligator-infested swamps in a bend of the Mississippi River. It spans 18,000 acres, an area bigger than the island of Manhattan, and has its own zip code. The former 19th century, so 1800s, antebellum plantation once was owned by one of the largest slave traders in the U.S., and today it still is. Today it houses more than 3,800 men behind its razor wire walls, about 65% of them black. Within days of arrival, they typically head to the fields, sometimes using hoes and shovels or picking crops by hand. They initially work for free, but they can earn between 2 cents and 40 cents an hour. Calvin Thomas, who spent more than 17 years at Angola, said anyone who refused to work, didn't produce enough, or just stepped outside the long straight rows knew there would be consequences. And if you read 12 Years a Slave, he said you got beat at least twice a day. Once in the morning, as soon as you got up, and at night after you got done working. Quote, if he shoots the gun in the air because you done passed that line, that means you're going to get locked up and you're going to have to pay for that bullet that he shot, end quote, said Thomas, adding that some days were so blistering hot, the guards' horses would collapse. And this is, again, this is the kind, from Calvin Thomas, a quote, you can't call it anything else. It's just slavery. So this is the kind of thing, like I said, that I learned when I was in Georgia, and I would see how the laws were applied. It was just the most punitive state. You could kind of, like, I remember I got a ticket one time. I was driving my cousin's truck, and they got a ticket because her tags were bad. And she was a police officer. So when she got pulled over, she would show her badge and nobody would care. I was driving a truck and I don't have a badge because I'm not a police officer. So I got a ticket. It was $250. So I called. I'm like 20 years old. And I called and I said, hey, is there any way I can reschedule my hearing with the judge? Because there was like no way for me to even just pay it. And they said, if you want to reschedule it, because I didn't have a car at this time, I was in Georgia, so I was using her car. If you want to reschedule it, you have to meet the judge and then they'll let you reschedule it. And I said, if I'm meeting the judge, then why do I need to reschedule? I'm already there, right? And the lady on the phone said, yeah, I guess. And so then I hung up. But it was the kind of application of law that I saw in the South where you could see how they were created to be racist laws, or at least, to target black people. And then after, the civil rights movement and all that stuff, they couldn't legally do that anymore. So they just kept the laws on the books and they just theoretically harassed everybody the same with those laws. But I mean, it was, I won't say I'll never move back to the South again because I don't know what the future holds for my life. But if I have anything to do with it, I ain't moving back down there. I'm good. I'm hesitant to even visit most of those places. Louisiana Corrections spokesman Ken Pastoric called the description, quote, absurd, end quote. He said the phrase, quote, sentence with hard labor, end quote, is a legal term referring to a prisoner with a felony conviction. Pastoric said the department has transformed Angola from, quote, the bloodiest prison in America, end quote, over the past several decades with, quote, large-scale criminal justice reforms and reinvestment into the creation of rehabilitation, vocational, and educational programs designed to help individuals better themselves and successfully return to communities, end quote. He noted that pay rates are set by state statute. Now, as I read to you about the minimum wage 2 days ago, I didn't read Louisiana, but some states don't even have a minimum wage for their own legal non-prisoner citizens who are not slaves, who cannot legally be slaves. You think they're going to set a minimum wage for the slaves? Come on now. Current and former, let's see how much time I got, because I know I passed the 1 minute and 30 second, hour and 30 second. Yeah, I'm at hour and 37. Well, so here's an interesting. So I'm gonna bring up the how should prisoners repay? Second question. They're living off our tax dollars. They committed the crime. That's not the same as being a slave. So I don't know how long you've been listening. I'm gonna try to go back up. I know um, it's been a while, but I'm gonna go back up. I'll go back up. Quote, it's a real slap in the face to hear where all those cattle are going, end quote, said Jermaine Hudson, who served 22 years at Angola on a robbery conviction before he was exonerated. So this is the issue. If you want to make somebody work, fine. But we live in a criminal justice system where laws have been specifically created to target our community, first and foremost. Secondly, even laws that in theory are used to target everybody, like drug offenses, the application of those laws is still skewed against us. So I'm gonna show you this video, and this might be where I end it for today. Well, let me read. I'll read this. It's just to hear prison labor over the years. So I'll read to here, and then I'll stop. I'll show you the video, and then I'll stop. So current and former prisoners in both Louisiana and Alabama have filed class action lawsuits in the past 4 months, saying they have been forced to provide cheap or free labor to those states and outside companies, a practice they had also described as slavery. Prisoners have been made to work since before emancipation, when slaves were at times imprisoned and then leased out by local authorities. But after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment's exception clause that allows for prison labor provided legal cover to round up thousands of mostly young Black men. Many were jailed for petty offenses like loitering and vagrancy. So loitering wasn't a crime, right? Just standing on the corner wasn't a crime. Vagrancy, which is like being out after a certain period of time, or let me look up what vagrancy even is. Let me look up what vagrancy is. So vagrancy is the state of living as a vagrant, homelessness. So after emancipation, you free your slaves and they don't have homes. And so you arrest them because they don't have homes, and you put them in prison and make them slaves again. How can being homeless be a crime? How can the act of being homeless in and of itself be a crime? But in the very beginning of the stream, I said there are no coincidences. So there is no coincidence that 65% of the men in prison in Louisiana are the same people that 100% were used as slaves in Louisiana. because there are no coincidences. But understand that what I'm saying. You took people who it's Tuesday. Monday, I was property. Tuesday, I'm a recognized free human being. Where did I get a home from? So I'm homeless now. I've committed a crime, and now I'll go to prison because I'm homeless. And you make me a slave again. That's the situation that we're under, right? Loitering wasn't a crime, which loitering is just being outside. Now, you might think, oh, it's a little intimidating, but it's not illegal. If I would just go stand outside on the street corner, that's not illegal. It is now, as a result of these laws I'm talking about. They call them the black codes. But loitering wasn't a thing. You know how they do the caroling door to door? People used to go caroling and sing for alcohol. And if you didn't give them alcohol, they would mess your house up. And it was like well known. That was just how the whole tradition of caroling came about. They would sing Christmas carols for cider and like spiced rum or warm, spiced wine. And then if you didn't give it to them, they would mess your house up. They would harass you. And so we have to understand that through that context. But I'm going to pause here on this article. And I'm going to show a video that I've had for a while that I know is going to help to kind of express what I'm dealing with. And I'm at 1 hour and 43 minutes. So if I get done before 2 hours, I'll be happy. But so I'm sure some of you have seen this. So if you have, hopefully you can hear this. But listen, look at this.
If you have
now, just to set the table, this is Senator Joe Biden on the left, current president, who is clear. I mean, when you see old videos of him, even from like 4 years ago, you can see the mental decline that he's going through. He really is like not there. And on the right is his son, the infamous crackhead. So can you hear that? Could you hear that? Could you hear that, everybody? Could you hear that? We started over again.
If you have a piece of crack cocaine, no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Under our forfeiture statutes, the government can take everything you own, everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you just got caught engaging in. They can take everything. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society. They are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
All right. So I'll end it there as far as the broadcast for tonight. But my point for showing that video is his father created a law No, his son isn't watching it. It was a video of his son on crack. And they juxtaposed that with his father condemning crack smokers, right? His father created a law that gave different penalties, punishment for the crime of drug possession or drug use. If a person has crack cocaine over powder cocaine, he says if you got a piece of crack is no bigger than this quarter, you're going to jail for not less than 5 years. His son has been caught smoking crack. This is a comedian named Josh Johnson, and he's very funny. He says, Joe Biden falls down every day. He says, because if I see you do something on camera 5 times, you do it every day. And that was like the punchline. And so I have seen different videos of his son smoking crack or even arguing with a chick, look like a prostitute. He was arguing with a prostitute about the weight of his crack rocks. Like he weighed it and it was like 21 grams. She said it was 20 grams. He was like, no, it's 21 grams. Like cracked out, crashed the vehicle in Las Vegas, a rental car. They found a crack pipe in it. Got kicked out of the Navy or the Air Force Reserves because he tested positive for crack or cocaine in his system. The man is a crackhead to the highest order. He don't have teeth. His teeth is rotted out, his real teeth. But he's not in jail. His father was an advocate for putting our people in prison so they can work in these conditions as slaves again, to supply the restaurants and the grocery stores and the corporations that we utilize every day. Crack, meth, whatever. I know he smokes crack. But whatever the case, we see an unequal application of the law by a man who hung his hat on making particularly extreme crime laws, anti-crime laws. You heard him say in the video, I don't care how they got this way. We want them away from my wife, your husband, my mother. He made it a moral problem. Well, you got to speak to your cousins about that. But he made it a moral problem when he spoke about, kids who when you spoke about people who did this kind of thing, right? Who had children who may have fallen off the wagon or gone off to the left in some kind of way. He spoke about them as if they had a personal moral failing. And so this is why you can have a debt repayment, but you have too many laws that either are specifically used to target our community, or the application of the laws is unjustly used to target our community. And so we cannot allow you to mask this punitive measures to perpetuate slavery in this way as anything other than exploitation. That's what it is. These corporations are still to this day using slave labor, and in certain cases like in Angola and the people in Arkansas and Alabama and Mississippi, you have people working fields their ancestors worked 100 years ago, 150 years ago, right? My father has a friend from Mississippi who said that his family worked for a year in Mississippi. on a farm, and they were paid, and they worked from sun up to sundown, and they were paid 14 cents for a year's worth of work in 1960 something. And they had to sneak out to go to Chicago. They had to sneak out, 9 of them in one car, 4 in the trunk, 2 driving, and then what's that? 6, and then it was 4 on the back seat, and or it might have been 2 on the back seat and 2 on the ground. All right. And they had to sneak out. And if they would have gotten caught by the police or the sheriff, if they had gotten caught by the police or the sheriff, they would have had to go back to Mississippi. They had to sneak in 1966. They had to sneak out of Mississippi after having been paid 14 cents for a year's worth of work for like 14 people. It wasn't 9 people, it was 14 people. It was 14 people because it was 4 in the trunk, it was 2 driving, it was 4 on the seat, and it was like 4 on the ground. And the country is still living. Old habits die hard. Free labor and the capitalist dream. And I'm about halfway through the article. Might be a little more than... it's a lot of pictures, so I'm not quite halfway through. I'm almost halfway through, but we'll have to try to finish this tomorrow or Saturday. But this is the kind of situation we're up against. And there's an exploitation that happens to all people. There were some white people in these pictures, right? But it is because so many white people believe the lie that the capitalist class tells them that their whiteness is valuable, that their whiteness will save them one day or save them too, that one day you can ascend to the levels that we are at. You could be Bill Gates. You could be Jeff Bezos. No, you can't. You got a better chance of being like me. That's why we need to come together and try to actually upend the system. We need to have a revolutionary overturning of this system. It does include reparations because our community has been targeted in a way that yours was not. You have to understand the totality of justice that's necessary for any type of forward progress as a nation of the working class. But they're still using slave labor to this day. I think they're going to talk about Parchman Prison in Mississippi. I believe they will be talking about it because it talks about Arkansas. It talks about and I have some information on Arkansas just specifically because you know Hillary and Bill was the first lady and the governor of Arkansas, so they got a little interesting tidbit of story about their time as governor and what they do in Arkansas. But the South is the South. So everybody want to move to Atlanta and all that. And they think they're going to go down there. And I don't know, do what? I don't know. But your people left the South for a reason. All of them. Did your ancestor who left the South tell you to move back? Did your ancestor who left the South tell you they set something up down there for you? Because mine didn't say that. When I was down there, I didn't leave outside of 285 because I didn't know them people. I went to Birmingham, Alabama twice, or Tuscaloosa 2 or 3 times, and it's just something different about being in those places. One wrong move, one wrong turn, and you don't know what you're going to meet. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what to expect. I stay up north where I know what's going on. I know that I ain't saying it's safer. I'm not saying it's better. What I'm saying is my grandfather left when he was 14 years old and came up north by himself. If that don't show you a desperation to leave a place, I don't know what is. And never in my whole life, he never talked to me about visiting. He never ever asked me to go down there. And he took my mother and my uncles and my aunt. He never talked to me about visiting ever. Ever. I never went. So I got a couple more books that I have some information from to contextualize what we're talking about. This is The World in Africa and Color and Democracy. It's a double book by W.E.B. Du Bois. Got some from 1984. Also some pertinent information in there. And I may try to get a little bit more information from Virtue Hoarders. I'm trying to see what I got to do to make the book show in clearly. But Virtue Hoarders is a great book. It's informative. It really Virtue Hoarders, the case against the progressive professional managerial class. It really, as far as I can see now, it lays the framework and the groundwork for understanding how the professional managerial class has been co-opted and overrun by people in the higher class group to be used as tools to oppress us in the working classes, right? Those of us who do manual labor, who work regular jobs, normal people who are trying to make ends meet, who may or may not have degrees, but who don't have a rich uncle or any relatives or anyone with particularly any money to speak of, unless there's some kind of life insurance policy that somebody doesn't know about. And it brings a fuller understanding of this exploitation that we're talking about, right? Because this is an exploitation that is necessary. And I feel like I didn't really get a chance to get into it as much because I was reading the article. But in order for capitalism to succeed, the system to make money, and I did talk about it some, but to make more money year over year over year, how do you do that, right? How do you go from taking the situation I gave where my sister was working at a job, she was a manager, and they made X amount of dollars this month because of a one-off occurrence like tax return, and then you want her to make 2% more that next month. On paper, that number isn't great, right? It's an extra $200. But when you don't factor in the circumstances surrounding that, right? That would be like saying, hey, I hit the lottery this month. I made an extra $5,000. So I should be able to make $5,050 next month. But you can't bank on hitting the lottery again. It's literally outside of your control, right? But the voracious appetite of the capitalist class is such that it does not consider those variables. Just like the game of Monopoly, it's a documentary. I think it's called Park Avenue, where it looks at Park Avenue in Manhattan, because it goes from Lower Manhattan all the way to the Bronx, and in the Bronx, it's like one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. And Lower Manhattan, you have $1 billion apartments, right? And they did an experiment with Monopoly where they gave one player half the money and they were able to collect half the money, and they weren't able to buy properties the same and all these other stipulations. And they gave another player double the money and they collected double the money when they passed go, and they got properties cheaper. And the player who was artificially given a boost in the game still behaved as though the reason they were good at the game was because of something they had done, and not because they had literally been given rules breaking assistance, and that the person who was losing had been given rules breaking harms, right? So it's all about understanding the psychology of human behavior. But we need a revolution in this country, sincerely, a workers-led revolution to upend this and overturn the way the structure is going. We have to figure out ways to awaken our friends, our family, our circle, and expose them to a different way of thinking, a better way of thinking, a better way of understanding the world around us. because eventually the beast comes for us all. You can only exploit the bottoms for so long before you need more. You got to have more. Right? At one point in time in this country, it was sufficient. And I showed the clip a couple days ago, and maybe I should find it. But Bill Kristol talks about how, the great thing about America is after you get here and you are stable, you immigrate here, you're stable. You don't need to work so hard. You don't need to do the jobs that pay little money and have little reward and require a lot of hard work. So you bring in more immigrants to fill in the gaps. So it's a country built off of exploitation. There's a song called B on It's Your World, Part 1 and Part 2 on Common's album B that came out in 2004. And in the song, there's a line in a poem at the end of the song. It says, "Be mindful or be cautious of asking a country built on free labor for reparations." And so that's something you got to be mindful of, right? This country was built on free labor. It was built on exploitation. They're not going to give nothing for free, but they will take for free. And so we have to awaken as many people as we can so we can form some kind of coalition. Because they'll put us all in prison. They'll put us all in prison. They'll put us all in some kind of chains, and they'll have us working for free. And they'll tell us that, like in 1984, freedom is slavery, war is peace. Courage is what does it say? War is slavery. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is wisdom, or something like that. Ignorance is strength. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. That's what they'll have us believing. That's where we'll be as a society. So I'll end it here. It was quite a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but realistically, I think we all knew that this was where it was heading. And so I'll be either tomorrow or Saturday. Yeah. So my grandfather, when he came back from the Korean War, he went to Georgia to visit an uncle, and so he's sitting on a log with his uncle. They're just sitting down next to each other, and he said all of a sudden he hears a whack, and his uncle just kind of laughs. He is that you, Mr. Jones, or whatever. So my grandfather said he turns around, full military outfit, just got back from Korea, and he said he sees a white kid, couldn't be much older than he is, who had a big stick, and he hit his uncle on the back. And so I'm like 9 years old. He tells me this story, and he says, "So what does that mean?" And so I'm like racking my brain, as a 9-year-old, what does this mean? And he says that means it wasn't the first time that ever happened. And he said, so in that moment, he got up immediately and left and came back up north. You just got back from supposedly serving your country. We could talk about the imperialist war that the Korean War was another time. But what do you do with that? Realistically, what do you do with that? So I don't want to keep you any longer than I was expecting to. I have already done that. But as again, I said, I think we already knew that was going to be the case. So on that note, first episode of A Look Underneath with Conspiracy Brother, simulcasting on the Freedman Collective. You can subscribe, share if you like this episode. Hit the bell for notifications on my page. You can look for me at a look underneath with Conspiracy Brother, or I think my handle is at Conspiracy Brother TFC. So the Freedman Collective. And again, for 24, our objective is to make more content, to get more exposure, hopefully get our story out, get information out, and just see who we can try to help to see things a little more clearly and just give information. That's primarily my objective. I come from the school that, with knowledge and information, you can make a good decision on your own. I don't have to persuade you one way or the other. So with sound information, you can be well informed enough to do the best thing for you. And so, that is what it is. And with that, I'll end it. Peace.